Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We move on to the next chapter of the Prophet's marriage to Zainab bint Jahash. Let's take the translation of this from Anas bin Malik. He says, when the waiting period of Zainab bint Jahash, who was married to Zayd ibn Haritha, was over, the Prophet told Zayd to mention her to him, meaning when her waiting period is over. Zayd went to her while she was fermenting the dough. He said, as I saw her, I felt in my heart some awe that I could not even look at her right. And the reason for this was that Allah's Messenger ﷺ had mentioned her. He says, so I turned my back to her. He said that the Messenger of Allah is mentioning you. That is to say that he wants to marry you. And she replied to that, I will not do anything until I solicit the will of my Rabb. So she stood up in her masjid, or the place of prayer, and the Quran had been sent down, or some ayat of the Quran was sent down, and the Prophet entered upon her without permission. Anas says, I saw the Messenger of Allah serving in the Walima bread and meat until it was broad daylight and the people went away, but some people were busy in conversation, so they stayed in the house, even after the meal. He says Allah's Messenger went out and began to visit the homes of his other wives, saying Assalamu alaikum, and they replied back, asking the Prophet, how did you find your wife? Anas says, I do not know whether I informed the Prophet that the people had gone out, or whether he informed me about that. So he's talking about those people who stayed behind when they should have left. These people eventually left. He says, the Prophet entered his house and I also wanted to enter in, but the Prophet drew the curtain between me and him, and the ayat of seclusion had been revealed, and the people were instructed to do what they had been instructed to do. And Ibn Rafi' adds in his narration the ayah لا تدخلوا بيوت النبي إلا أن يؤذن لكم إلى طعام غير ناظرين إناه, up until when he says والله لا يستحيي من الحق. In another wording of this narration, as there are many wordings in this chapter, but Anas says ما أولم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم على امرأة من نسائه أكثر أو أفضل مما أولم على زينب. I never saw the Prophet give a better walima for any one of his wives than he did for Zainab. And when Anas was asked what did the Prophet give for the food, he said أطعمهم خبزا ولحما حتى تركوه. He gave them bread and meat until they left it, so they could not eat anymore. So from these narrations we can contrast the walima of Safiya bint Huyay and the walima of Zainab bint Jahsh. With Safiya's walima, the Prophet told everyone to chip in, and they made hais, which is from dates and cooked cheese and butter. And as for the walima of Zainab bint Jahash, it was a much more luxurious walima with bread and meat, and it proves that there's no problem in having a luxurious walima with some good quality food, as this does not happen every day. It's just when you overindulge in luxury items of the world is when there is a problem. The walima should be given with whatever is easy for you to give. So a rich person gives a better walima than a poor one, as Allah Jalla wa Ala says, لِيُنْفِقَ ذُو سَعَةٍ مِّن سَعَتِهِ وَمَنْ قُدِرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقُهُ فَلْيُنْفِقْ مِمَّا آتَاهُ اللَّهُ. Let the one who has more money give from more of his money in accordance with his means. Then as for the one who is in straitened circumstances, then let him spend from that which Allah has given him. So everyone in accordance with their financial circumstance. It's the same thing for the mahar as well. And it's the same thing for the nafaqah, for the expenditure of your family. You do it in accordance with your means. We know that the general mahar for the Prophet was 500 dirham, that's 12.5 uqiyah. But we also saw that the mahar of Safiya bint Huyay was that he simply freed her. So there are no hard and fast rules. The only point is you have to be reasonable and use common sense. We saw in the previous hadith that the Prophet rebuked the one who gave only 4 uqiyah as a mahar. Why? Because this was too much for him. The Prophet told him, it's as if you have dug up silver from the side of this mountain such that you can give that much. But the point is, do not put yourself in a situation which will prove to be too much for you to bear. Authentically, the Prophet ﷺ said in the Sunan, لا ينبغي للمؤمن أن يذل نفسه. It is not fitting for a mu'min to humiliate his own self. They asked him, وَكَيْفَ يُذِلُّ نَفْسَهُ? How does he humiliate his own self? The Prophet replied, أَن يَتَعَرَّضَ مِنَ الْبَلَاءِ مَا لَا يُطِيقُ, that he exposes himself to trials which he will not be able to overcome. So that is, you expose yourself to those tests and trials which you do not have in your capacity to overcome. We found that in this Walima of Zainab bin Jahash, some people stayed after eating the food, so they overstayed their welcome. But the Prophet was shy to tell them to leave. But Allah Jalla wa Ala says in Surah Al-Ahzab, فَإِذَا طَعِمْتُمْ فَانْتَشِرُوا, when you have eaten, then leave and spread out throughout the land. وَلَا مُسْتَأْنِسِينَ لِحَدِيثٍ, and do not gather together for speech. إِنَّ ذَلِكُمْ كَانَ يُؤْذِي النَّبِيَّ فَيَسْتَحْيِي مِنْكُمْ, because that annoys the Prophet, but he's too shy to tell you. وَاللَّهُ لَا يَسْتَحْيِي مِنَ الْحَقِّ, but Allah is not shy to speak the truth. We can take from this ayah that if the host wants you to stay and speak, then of course you can do so, because the illah, the justification is that it annoys the host. But as long as you are not annoying or harming the host, then it is fine to speak and socialize. And this rule is not just about the walima, it's about any social event. So if a person invites you to a cup of tea, let's say, again, you can have this tea, but do not overstay your welcome. And again, just sound judgment needs to be applied here. We see from this narration and its companion ayah that the Prophet was shy, and it has been narrated in the Sahihain that the Prophet was more shy than a virgin girl behind her curtain. But despite the Prophet's shyness, he was not shy to speak the truth. So these are from his characteristics. We learn also that this idea of hijab came down in the 6th year of the Hijri calendar, and this is the well-known opinion amongst the scholars. And before that, the women did not used to wear the hijab. So all of these narrations that you may come across, which may demonstrate that the women did not cover their faces, they are likely to have been before the advent of the hijab ruling. Except the hadith of the woman of Khath'amiyya would suggest that there were women who did not cover their faces. The ayah referred to in the narration is when Allah Jalla wa Ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَدْخُلُوا بُيُوتَ النَّبِيِّ إِلَّا أَن يُؤْذَنَ لَكُمْ إِلَى طَعَامٍ غَيْرَ نَاظِرِينَ إِنَاهُ. O you who believe, do not enter the Prophet's homes unless permission is given to you for a meal, and then not so early as to wait for its preparation. So do not enter too early. وَلَكِنْ إِذَا دُعِيتُمْ فَادْخُلُوا فَإِذَا طَعِمْتُمْ فَانْتَشِرُوا وَلَا مُسْتَأْنِسِينَ لِحَدِيثٍ. But when you are invited, then enter, and when you have eaten, then disperse, without sitting with each other to talk. إِنَّ ذَلِكُمْ كَانَ يُؤْذِي النَّبِيَّ فَيَسْتَحْيِي مِنْكُمْ وَاللَّهُ لَا يَسْتَحْيِي مِنَ الْحَقِّ. This annoys the Prophet, but he's too shy to tell you, but Allah is not shy from the truth. وَإِذَا سَأَلْتُمُوهُنَّ مَتَاعًا فَاسْأَلُوهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَاءِ حِجَابٍ. And when you ask the wives of the Prophet for anything, then ask them from behind a screen or a veil, that is a hijab. ذَلِكُمْ أَطْهَرُ لِقُلُوبِكُمْ وَقُلُوبِهِنْ. That is purer for your hearts and their hearts. وَمَا كَانَ لَكُمْ أَن تُؤْذُوا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ وَلَا أَن تَنْكِحُوا أَزْوَاجَهُ مِنْ بَعْدِهِ أَبَدًا إِنَّ ذَلِكُمْ كَانَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ عَظِيمًا. And it is not right for you to annoy Allah's Messenger, nor that you should ever marry his wives after his death. Verily, that would be an enormity with Allah. Now, of course, you do not enter anyone's home before you have been invited. This is not just for the home of the Prophet, rather for anyone's house. We find from the narration that Zayd says he could not even bear to look at Zainab, and the reason for this is because the Prophet expressed interest in marriage, so that even if he looks at a person whom the Prophet is going to marry, this would be, in his mind, stepping on the toes of the Prophet or transgressing against the Prophet. And this really shows us how much in awe the companions were of the Prophet. We find from this narration the legislation of Salat al-Istikhara, because this is what Zainab bint Jahash did. But Was she in doubt then about this marriage? Could she ever be in doubt about marrying the Prophet? If there's one person you can be sure will make for the perfect husband, it would be the Prophet. How can you ever be in doubt about this? So why make Salatul Istikhara? This is the question. Well, we say that she was never in doubt as to whether the Prophet would be an ideal husband or not. That's out of the question. If he's not the ideal husband, then there is no ideal husband on planet Earth. But rather what she was unsure of was whether she'll be able to fulfill her duty properly as a wife. So is she the right person to be his wife? Not the other way around. So it's not the case whether the Prophet is the right man to be her husband. It needs to be understood that the real purpose behind why Allah Jalla wa Ala married the Prophet to Zainab bin Jahash is to remove this ruling or this idea from the minds of the people that you are not allowed to marry the divorced wife of your adopted son. Because Zayd ibn Haritha was the adopted son of the Prophet at the time when adoption was allowed. And the Arab, they thought that it was an evil practice to marry the divorced wife of your adopted son. And the Sharia is showing here that your adopted son is not your real son, so that you can marry the divorced wife of your adopted son, and that you should not get him mixed up with your biological son. Yes, if your biological son marries a woman, then you are never allowed to marry that woman. She becomes haram for you forever. As Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَحَلَائِلُ أَبْنَائِكُمُ الَّذِينَ مِنْ أَصْلَابِكُمْ, and the wives of your sons from your loins. So these are mahram for you forever. But as for your adopted son, then he is not your real son, and he does not take your surname. And that he is just like any other person whose divorced wife you are allowed to marry. There's also a fabricated narration pertaining to this case, which says that the Prophet desired to marry Zayd's wife, Zainab, when he was still married to her. And this is a lie against the Prophet. You can find this narration in some books of tafsir, but it is a fabrication. The Prophet would not desire to marry anyone's wife whilst she is married to that man. Rather, Allah informed the Prophet that Zayd is going to divorce his wife, and we will marry her to you. And the Prophet knew that this is going to bring shame upon him because, like we just mentioned, this was a taboo subject. You are not to marry your adopted son's divorced wife, and everyone is going to think badly of the Prophet. And so in his heart, the Prophet feared the people, and Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَتَخْشَى النَّاسَ وَاللَّهُ أَحَقُّ أَن تَخْشَى. You feared the people, but Allah has more right that you should fear Him. And we married her to you, Allah Jalla wa Ala says, لِكَيْ لَا يَكُونَ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ حَرَجٌ فِي أَزْوَاجِ أَدْعِيَائِهِمْ إِذَا قَضَوْا مِنْهُنَّ وَطَرًا وَكَانَ أَمْرُ اللَّهِ مَفْعُولًا. So that the mu'mineen would have no problem in marrying the divorced wives of their adopted sons when their adopted sons do not have any need for the wives anymore, and the order of Allah must come to pass. So this is the reason. As for this idea that the Prophet desired another man's wife, then this is a lie against the Prophet. Let us move to the next chapter about the obligation of answering the call of the wedding feast, the Walima. There are many hadith in this chapter. Let's take a selection of them. From Ibn Umar radiallahu anh, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا دُعِيَ أَحَدُكُمْ إِلَى الْوَلِيمَةِ فَلْيَأْتِهَا. When one of you is called to the walima, then let him attend. Also from Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا دُعِيَ أَحَدُكُمْ فَلْيُجِبْ فَإِنْ كَانَ صَائِمًا فَلْيُصَلِّ وَإِنْ كَانَ مُفْطِرًا فَلْيَطْعَمْ. When one of you is called, then let him answer. If he is fasting, then let him make dua. But if he is not fasting, then let him eat. Also from Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, شَرُّ الطَّعَامِ طَعَامُ الْوَلِيمَةِ يُمْنَعُهَا مَنْ يَأْتِيهَا وَيُدْعَى إِلَيْهَا مَنْ يَأْبَاهَا وَمَنْ لَمْ يُجِبِ الدَّعْوَةَ فَقَدْ عَصَى اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ. The worst type of food is the food of the walima, where the one who would want to attend is prevented from attending, meaning the poor people, and the one who would reject attending it is called to this walima, meaning to say the rich people. And he says, whoever does not answer the call, then he has disobeyed Allah and His Messenger. These ahadith speak of one of the rights of the Muslim over the other Muslim. When he calls you, then you should answer. Now it is obligatory to attend the walima. There is no doubt about this, but that is subject to conditions. So let's talk about these conditions. Number one, that the one calling you is a Muslim, because this is the right of a Muslim over another Muslim. As for if he is a kafir, then it is not obligatory to answer this call, because he does not have the same type of rights over you as another Muslim would. Condition number two, his earning should be halal. If his earning is haram, then the food he's serving you will be from haram means, and hence the ulama have made this condition that his earning should be halal. So if, for example, he's working in a riba type of bank, or just helping out the bank, even serving as an officer or a security guard to this bank, that would be haram earning. Or perhaps working in a pub where alcohol is served, and so on. However, this condition can be debated, because you could say that as long as the food he's serving you is halal, then it's halal to eat it. As for whether he obtained it through haram money, that's upon him. But as long as the food itself is halal, so it is not pork, for example, or for example, it is not stolen food, because that would be haram in and of itself if you know it is stolen or usurped, and hence it is not permissible to eat such food, or consume any such item, or make use of any item that is stolen or usurped, because that is haram in and of itself. It did not come into his possession through the goodwill of the other person who is the owner of the item. But what about if his earning is haram, so let's say from riba sources, but he bought this food through halal means, just from a shop, let's say. Here one can make a case that it is permissible to attend. So it is not haram to attend, nor is it wajib to attend, but it is permissible to do so. The Prophet ﷺ answered the call of the Yahud, and we know they dealt in riba. And the reason is because the Prophet is not consuming something which is haram in and of itself, such as usurped food or stolen food. A further evidence to this ruling can also be where in the Sahih, Barira, who was a freed servant woman, was given sadaqah. Now we know the Prophet is not allowed to eat from the sadaqah, but the Prophet desired that this meat should be given to him, because as he came in the house he saw it being cooked, and his family only served him some bread and some other material which he did not particularly like. It was not as delicious as the meat. He said, "Where is that meat I saw being cooked?" And he was told, "But this is sadaqah which was given to Barira." And the Prophet ﷺ then said, "Huwa laha sadaqah wa lana minha hadiyah." It is a sadaqah for her, but from her to us it is a gift. And the Prophet is allowed to accept gifts, we know that. But he's not allowed to accept sadaqah. So the point is, we have two different routes here. For Barira it was a sadaqah, but for the Prophet it was a gift. So if we apply the situation now, the person earning the haram money, it is haram for him from that route. But this food which is given to us from him, that is a halal route. There's nothing haram about that. So you see, the routes are different. Now you contrast that with a person earning haram money. Are his children allowed to inherit this money? The answer is no, because it was obligatory upon this man to give this money as charity. Now if the children inherit this money, it would also be obligatory upon them to give this money as charity, because the money itself was earned in a haram fashion. Similar to if the money was stolen, that's also earned in a haram fashion. It is upon the father to give it away in charity if he cannot return it. Similarly, if the sons inherit from him, it is also obligatory upon them to give it away in charity. And so therefore haram wealth is not to be inherited, and this is the weightier opinion. Whereas in the walima, what's happening is that the person, if he earns haram money, and from this money he purchases food in a halal transaction, then there is no problem in us eating the food, because firstly the food itself is halal, and secondly the food was bought in a halal fashion. Meaning to say, the food itself is not stolen. It was actually bought. Yes, it is true. If we feel that in refusing to come to his walima, this would teach him a lesson, and hopefully he will change his ways, then this is a recommended action. We ought to follow this. So it would form a ta'zir, which is an exemplary punishment to rectify a person. And we have the third condition, that the one throwing the walima must invite you by name or by person. If he just gives a general invitation out to, let's say, your family, then you personally are not responsible to attend. Rather, it becomes much more like a fard kifaya type of thing, where someone must attend from the family. But you individually are not obliged to attend because he did not mention your name. So the point is, as long as we know he did not intend you personally, then you are not obliged to go. The fourth condition, that there should be no munkar in that particular place. If there is munkar in that particular place, such as free mixing or music, then if you are able to change it, then you should attend and change it. This will be better for you. If you are unable to change it, then as we know, Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَقَدْ نَزَّلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الْكِتَابِ أَنْ إِذَا سَمِعْتُمْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ يُكْفَرُ بِهَا وَيُسْتَهْزَأُ بِهَا فَلَا تَقْعُدُوا مَعَهُمْ حَتَّى يَخُوضُوا فِي حَدِيثٍ غَيْرِهِ إِنَّكُمْ إِذًا مِثْلُهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ جَامِعُ الْمُنَافِقِينَ وَالْكَافِرِينَ فِي جَهَنَّمَ جَمِيعًا. It has been sent down to you in the book that when you hear the ayat of Allah being rejected or being mocked at, then do not sit with such people until they talk about something different, because if you do, you would be just like them. Verily, Allah will collect the munafiqeen and the kafirin all together in Jahannam. So the lesson we take from this ayah is that if you're in a place of munkar and you do not change it and you remain there, then you take the same ruling as those who are indulging in this munkar or forbidden act. Even if you are not physically involved in that act, you take the same ruling as if you were. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَإِمَّا يُنْسِيَنَّكَ الشَّيْطَانُ فَلَا تَقْعُدْ بَعْدَ الذِّكْرَى مَعَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. And if shaitan makes you forget to leave, then you should not sit with the zalimeen after you remember that you should leave. The fifth condition, that it should be the walima of the first day, not the second or third, because some people may have a walima for 3 days, and you are not required to attend the walima for 3 days. They might have a walima for 3 days because the place is small and the guests are many. So what we're saying here is that you are not required to attend for 2 or 3 days. The first day or just 1 day is wajib. The sixth condition, that this person calling you must not be someone whom you should abandon. Such a person could be someone who openly calls to reprehensible bid'ah, or for example someone who openly commits sins or calls to committing sins, such as sodomy or fornication and any other such things, who openly and proudly calls to committing sins, saying it is okay or there's nothing wrong with it, and so on. The problem with answering such a person's call is that if you did answer the call, it indicates that you are happy with what he's doing. So, in other words, you're happy with his calling to bid'ah or openly committing sins. There is another question that needs to be asked. Is it only the walima that is wajib to attend? Well, some scholars say the walima only is wajib to attend. Any other invitation, let's say for a cup of tea or something of the like, it is recommended. Other scholars do not make a distinction. They say all types of invitation are wajib to attend. A decent opinion would be that for other than a walima, it is recommended to attend unless not attending would lead to something haram, such as cutting off ties of kinship. So if a family member invites you for dinner or tea or something, and you do not attend, it would lead to cutting off ties of kinship and one thinking negatively of you, then here it is wajib to attend. Likewise, if not attending will create feelings of animosity, then it is wajib to attend. Other than that, it is recommended. This appears to be a nice middle ground, because it needs to be known generally that the Sharia, from its beginning to its end, has been sent down to realize the benefits of people, and it is not in the benefit of the people to have feelings of animosity between them. We also find from one of the narrations we quoted that if you are fasting, you can just attend the invitation, but you make dua for the host. But this leads to another question. Is it not permissible to break the fast and eat? Would that not be better? Here we need to look at the scenario. If it is the case that there's, let's say, a large gathering and you are no one particularly special, such that the host is giving you special consideration, and that the host will not be annoyed or offended if you don't eat from his food, then you do not need to eat. And if you're fasting, you can simply make dua. If it is the case that, let's say, you're a guest of honor, or perhaps in not eating the host will be offended, then in such a case you must eat. and if it is a fast that you are on, so this is a nafilah fast, then you must break that fast, and you're allowed to break a nafilah fast, there's no doubt about that, and you must eat. Because it is not from the muru'ah or the goodly qualities of a person that he offends the host who has gone to trouble to prepare food for him, and yet he comes and does not eat. This is offensive, and it is not from the goodly qualities of a man. One might ask, but if a person is fasting and attends the walima and does not eat, this is going to be very awkward when everyone else is eating. We say yes, it will certainly be awkward, which is why you should make yourself useful and perhaps help and serve those who are eating. And this will prevent you from sticking out like a sore thumb.
Okay, here's a question. What if a qadi or a judge is called to a walima? Does the same ruling apply, that it is wajib for him to attend? Well, the generality of the wording would suggest yes, it's wajib for him as well. After all, why should a qadi be an exception? However, one may need to take a look here, because it may be that this invitation to a walima is a hidden bribery, so that the qadi develops a soft spot for the one who invited him to this most delicious food and entertainment. So one needs to exercise sound judgment in a case like this. Also, if a person is going to be harmed if he is to attend the walima, or is going to cause him difficulty of some sort, then in a case like this he should seek to excuse himself with the host, and then he is no longer obligated to attend. Also, pertaining to the obligation of the walima, there's no doubt that it is wajib, but what about other than a walima? Just some other feast? Well, the generality of the wording would suggest that any feast is wajib to attend. Some wordings say, ursan kana aw nahwa, whether it is an urs, meaning a wedding feast, or something similar to it. So the scholars who hold that any feast is wajib to attend to, they have a strong opinion. And the majority say that the walima is wajib and any other invitation to food is mustahab.
Let us now move to the next chapter about how the woman who has been divorced thrice from her husband is not allowed to marry him until she consummates marriage with another man, and then he happens to divorce her, and then she completes her iddah. Then she is allowed to go back to the first. So the hadith in the chapter from Aisha, she says that there came to the Prophet the wife of Rifa'ah, and she told him that I was married to Rifa'ah, but he divorced me 3 times. Afterwards I married Abdurrahman ibn Zabir, but all he possesses is the like of the fringe of a garment. That is to say, he is sexually weak. Thereupon the Prophet smiled, and he said, أَتُرِيدِينَ أَن تَرْجِعِي إِلَى رِفَاعَةٍ? You want to return to Rifa'ah? He says, لا حتى تذوقي عسيلته ويذوق عسيلتك. No, you cannot do that until you experience sexual pleasure with him and he experiences it with you. Then Aisha says that Abu Bakr was with the Prophet at that time, and another companion, Khalid, was outside the room of the Prophet waiting at the door, but he overheard what was being said, and Khalid said, يا أبا بكر ألا تسمع هذه ما تجهر به عند رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Khalid said from outside the room, "O Abu Bakr, do you not listen to this woman, what she is saying out aloud in front of the Prophet?" So, as for the divorce, then this could take different rulings, but the asl is that if there's no particular reason to do so, then it is makruh to get divorced because you're depriving yourself of the various benefits of the marriage. As for the hadith, أَبْغَضُ الْحَلَالِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الطَّلَاقِ, the most hated of the halal things to Allah is talaq or divorce, then that hadith is weak. It is reported by Abu Dawood and others. The talaq can be haram if it is said 3 times in a row in one sitting, or if you divorce your wife in a period of her menstrual cycle, or in a period of purity in which you have had intercourse with her. It could be wajib if you have made ila on your wife and the 4 months have passed and you refuse to take her back, it would become wajib to divorce her. It could be recommended to divorce if she demands this divorce for a valid reason. An invalid reason would be if she's, say, under some stress of menstruation, let's say perhaps of pregnancy or some other stress, and she, because of this, ask for a divorce. No, of course not. She's not her usual self, so you do not respond there. But if there is a genuine reason, then you would be doing her an ihsan, a good doing, if you were to divorce her in this particular case. So in that sort of case, you have to weigh up the pros and cons. But there must not be any harm that results from this divorce in that case. For example, if you have children and maybe if you divorced her, you would lose the rights of your children and so on. So in a case like this where there is some harm and maybe the harm overcomes the benefit, then no, you would not accede to her demand. It would be wajib to divorce her if she is a fornicator who does not repent, because that will make you into a dayuth, and a dayuth does not enter Jannah. And we find she told him that he only has the fringe of a garment. That's like a thread hanging down from a garment, a loose thread. That is another way of saying that he's sexually weak. He cannot sexually please her. Now this is the type of statement which a woman would be even too shy to say in front of other women. So how about other men, and especially the Prophet? But the Prophet simply smiled, and this reflects his soft and gentle personality. And so the Prophet caught on that she wants to return back to her first husband, Rifa'ah. And he told her no until you both have sexual intercourse with each other. So we can take some benefits from this hadith. We immediately take the obvious benefit. It is that when a woman is divorced 3 times, she is not allowed to return back to the first husband, even with a new contract, until she consummates marriage with another man. And then, if that marriage ends up in a divorce, then she can return back. Allah Jalla wa Ala says in the Quran, فَإِن ضَلَّقَهَا فَلَا تَحِلُّ لَهُ مِن بَعْدُ حَتَّى تَنْكِحَ زَوْجًا غَيْرَهُ. And then when he divorces her, meaning the full 3 divorces, then she's not halal for him until she marries another husband. And we find from this hadith that this marriage must be consummated, not just merely the contract. Because if it wasn't for this, then a man could divorce his wife just however many times he wants to, 100 times, and they could just always return back to each other. And this would be fun and games. We need to have a rule which would stop this type of thing. And the rule is that she must consummate marriage with the second husband. This will prevent the first husband from divorcing her, taking her back, divorcing her, taking her back, and so on. Because if a husband has to divorce his wife 3 times, it normally is a good indicator that they're simply not compatible. So if they're simply not compatible, then we must make it very difficult for this man to take her back after the 3 divorces. And this rule does exactly that. And when we say that she needs to consummate marriage with a second man, then of course this must be a valid contract. So this man must not be marrying her just in order to consummate the marriage and then to divorce her so that she can go back to the first husband. This type of contract is batil, and it does not count. Likewise, we talked about the shighar. It is not allowed to be a shighar contract. And likewise, there's another one called mut'ah, which is a temporary marriage, and this is also batil, and you're not allowed. And we spoke about that also. Now, we find also that she made mention of this man behind his back. Is this backbiting? Well, backbiting would only happen if you speak behind another Muslim's back without there being a need to do so, so gratuitously. But in this case now, it was for the sake of learning. She also spoke about something which you normally are shy of speaking about. But again, it would be allowed in this case for the sake of learning a rule, which is what she came here for. It's similar to how Sulaim asked the Prophet if women need to take a bath if they have a wet dream. And the Prophet said, نَعَمْ إِذَا هِيَ رَأَتِ الْمَاءِ. Yes, if she sees water or liquid. So that is some discharge. We also take from this hadith the good etiquette and manners and the gentle nature of the Prophet. He did not rebuke this woman for saying such words, because he knew that she came with a good intention of learning, even though she spoke about someone behind his back, and also she spoke words which normally you are embarrassed to speak about. We also find from this narration that Khalid was standing outside the room, and we take that you are not allowed to enter somebody's private dwelling until permission is given to you. And Khalid spoke from outside, calling to Abu Bakr, saying, look at this woman, she's not even shy of what she's speaking about. And so it should not be thought that these women during those times were very shy. No, on the contrary, they were not afraid at all to speak about even embarrassing matters. Let's move to the next chapter about the dua made before conjugal relations with the wife. From Abdullah ibn Abbas that the Prophet said, لو أن أحدهم إذا أراد أن يأتي أهله قال بسم الله اللهم جنبنا الشيطان وجنب الشيطان ما رزقتنا فإنه إن يقدر بينهما ولد في ذلك لم يضره شيطان أبدا. If one of the people wants to have conjugal relations with the wife and then he makes this dua in the name of Allah, O Allah, make us avoid shaitan and make the shaitan avoid or keep the shaitan away from what you provide us, then if they are due to have a child in this, then the shaitan would never harm it. Can we take from this hadith that you're allowed to make mention of Allah or dhikr of Allah when you are exposing your awrah? Well, it appears from this hadith that you're allowed to. One might ask, but it is still possible to make this dua with your clothes on or with your awrah covered and then thereafter have conjugal relations. And that is when you would have to uncover the awrah. That is certainly possible, but what is closer to the apparent or zahir of the hadith is that this person is saying it with his awrah uncovered. One may ask about this hadith, but are you really saying that the shaitan will never harm him? Well, the answer is that this hadith, or this action in the hadith, is a sabab, it's a cause for the desired effect. But for every cause, there are preventative factors, mawani'. So for example, every child will grow up to worship Allah Jalla wa'ala, or to have this belief about Allah, one supreme creator worthy of worship. But his parents and his environments can change him into becoming a polytheist. So these are preventative factors. In medicine, a particular medicine is used to treat a particular disease, but this medicine may not work because it could be that the patient is taking other medicines which prevent the first medicine from having the desired effect. Another question is, does the woman make this dua? Well, what is apparent from the hadith is that the man makes this dua. But supposing if the man does not say it, then we do not feel there is too much of a problem if the woman is to say it. Let us take the next chapter about the permissibility of having conjugal relations with the wife through the back, but the penetration must be in the front passage. The hadith from Jabir, he says that the Yahud would say that if a person has intercourse with his wife from behind, yet in the front passage, then the child, if one is born from this, would be cross-eyed, or he would have his eyes not aligned properly. And to this, Allah Jalla wa'ala sent down the ayah, نِسَاؤُكُمْ حَرْثٌ لَكُمْ فَأْتُوا حَرْثَكُمْ أَنَّا شِئْتُمْ. Your wives are a tilth for you, so go to your tilth however you wish to. So he likens the wives to a tilth where you plough the seeds. And this is the analogy of sexual intercourse. A man sows his seeds. Now this ayah in this hadith does not mean that you're allowed to have anal sexual intercourse. That is a major sin. And the curse of Allah Jalla wa'ala is upon such people. Authentically in Sunan Abi Dawud, the Prophet ﷺ said, مَلْعُونٌ مَنْ أَتَى إِمْرَأَتَهُ فِي دُبُرِهَا. The one who has anal intercourse with his wife is cursed. But this is where the penetration is through the back passage. As for if you go from behind but the penetration is in the front passage, then this is halal. In fact, any type of sexual position is allowed. And also in the Sunan authentically, لا ينظر الله إلى رجل أتى رجلا أو امرأة في دبرها. Allah will not look at a man who has intercourse with another man or has intercourse with a woman in her back passage. That is anal intercourse. So these two ahadith, authentically in the Sunan, prove without a doubt that anal intercourse is haram. And also, sodomy is a major sin. As for the anal intercourse, we can also make analogy. And we can say that a man is forbidden from having intercourse with his wife during her hayd, her menstrual cycle, because the menstrual blood is najis. If that is the case for the menstrual blood, then the back passage is the place of feces. And how much more najis is that than the menstrual blood? Far more so, and hence that prohibition is far more emphatic, and the act therefore far more reprehensible. So how about then the act of sodomy, which would be yet more reprehensible than the anal intercourse with your wife? So this narration tells us the sababun nuzul, the reason for the descent of that particular ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah. And often knowing the cause or the sababun nuzul of an ayah helps us to understand it. So for example, إِنَّ الصَّفَا وَالْمَرْوَةَ مِنْ شَعَائِرِ اللَّهِ فَمَنْ حَجَّ الْبَيْتَ وَاعْتَمَرَ فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِ أَنْ يَطَّوَّفَ بِهِمَا. Safa and Marwa are from the emblems of Allah, so whoever performs the Hajj or the Umrah, there is no sin upon him to make tawaf between them, between the Safa and Marwa. So if we say there is no sin, that would mean that at best it is permissible to make the Sa'i between the Safa and Marwa. But of course we know that is not the case. Your Hajj and your Umrah cannot be complete except with the Sa'i between the Safa and Marwa. And this is what one of the Tabi'i thought in Sahih Muslim when he mentioned this to Aisha. And Aisha radiallahu anha replied to him, no, Allah will not complete your Hajj and Umrah until you make the Sa'i. And she gave him the Sababun Nuzul, the reason why this ayah was sent down. The reason is the Sahaba did not want to make Sa'i between these two places because on these mountains there used to be idols. So the Sahaba felt reluctant to go to these places. So here Allah Jalla wa Ala is simply telling them, no, there will not be any sin upon you if you make the Sa'i between these two mountains. That is to say, it is not haram. But this rule does not negate the fact that making the Sa'i is from the arkan of the Hajj and the Umrah. And the Safa and Marwa are from the Sha'airillah, from the emblems of Allah, and to make a ta'zeem or a veneration of the emblem of Allah is wajib, and it is from the taqwa al-qulub. Let's move to the next chapter about the woman refusing to have conjugal relations with her husband. The hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. The Prophet said, إِذَا دَعَى الرَّجُلُ إِمْرَأَتَهُ إِلَى فِرَاشِهِ فَلَمْ تَأْتِهِ فَبَاتَ غَضْبَانَ عَلَيْهَا لَعَنَتْهَا الْمَلَائِكَةُ حَتَّى تُصْبِحْ. When a man calls his wife to his bed and she does not come, and he spends the night angry with her, the angels will curse her until morning. We immediately take from the hadith that it is not permissible for the woman to refuse sexual intercourse with her husband if she does not have a valid reason to do so. So for example, if she's in her hayd, then yes, she has every right to refuse because it is the husband who is doing the wrong. Otherwise the husband has great rights. So if she makes some lame excuses, then that is not permissible and she's not giving her husband his right, and that's a sin on her part. An attitude like this from the wife would encourage the husband to cheat on her, especially if the husband is of weak iman. If he's of strong iman, we hope he will not cheat, but if he is of weak iman, then yes, there's every chance that he will cheat on her and it will ruin the relationship. So attitude like this ruins the marriage. In fact, when either party does not give each other their rights, it will ruin the relationship, be it to a small extent or a large extent. Okay, what about the other way around? What if the wife asks the husband for intercourse and he refuses? What's the ruling there? The ruling is that it is not permissible for him to do so. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. And they, the women, have similar rights that the husbands have in accordance with the customs. So there's no doubt that he is in the wrong, but we cannot say that the malaika will curse him, because this is a matter of the unseen. And when we speak about the unseen, we need to have evidence. If she refuses, there needs to be a good reason. For example, if she is ill, or maybe if she's pregnant, like we said, if she is in the hayd, or for example, if the prayer time has come and she has to obviously give precedence to the prayer because otherwise the prayer time will exit, or maybe she is fasting, a fard fast, she has every right to refuse, and that would be obviously in the morning, but the point is she would have the right to refuse. So we can sum it up by saying that if there is a physical harm on her, or if there is a Shar'i harm on her, then yes, she has the right to refuse. Another question is, this curse of the malaika, why does it happen? Does it happen because she's refused the demand from the husband? Or does it happen because he spends the night angry with her? Because it may be that he demands from her and she refuses, but he is easygoing and he does not spend the night angry with her. He lets her off. Well, it's a tricky one. One might say the hadith says that he spends the night angry with her, so he must be angry with her for the curse to take place. Others may say, no, the fact that he's angry with her is going to be most often the case. That's why the Prophet mentions it. Otherwise, simply refusing his demand is enough for the curse. And Allah Jalla wa Ala knows best. We may ask a question, this curse, is it specific to the night? So the angels curse her until the morning, so that would be during the night? The answer is no. Again, this is kharaja makhraj al-ghalib. This hadith comes out of the most common exit. Otherwise, even during the daytime, if she refuses and he's angry with her, then the malaika will curse her. Some other narrations in the chapter say that the one in the sama, in the highness, will be angry on her. So that would prove that Allah Jalla wa Ala is in the highness, is in the sama. not the sky, in the sama, meaning here highness. Or if you want to translate it to sky, then we can say above the sky. And it also proves to us that Allah Jalla wa Ala has the description of anger. But this is a sifa fi'liya. It happens when He wills it to happen. Those who deny the attributes of Allah Jalla wa Ala, such as the Ash'ariyah, they say that Allah does not become angry. They say that the anger of Allah means that He is going to take revenge, or that He wants to take revenge. And of course that is tahrif. Let us move to the next chapter of divulging the secrets between the husband and wife. From Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ مِنْ أَشَرِّ النَّاسِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ مَنْزِلَةً يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ الرَّجُلَ يُفْضِي إِلَى امْرَأَتِهِ وَتُفْضِي إِلَيْهِ ثُمَّ يَنْشُرُ سِرَّهَا. Indeed, from the most evil of men with Allah in their status on Yawm al-Qiyamah is a man who has intercourse with his wife and then he spreads her secrets. So this hadith is talking about the most evil of men with respects to spreading secrets. Otherwise there will be many men who are more evil than this type of person. So the hadith is talking about the type of man who tells his friends or other people, I did such and such with my wife. And he's talking about these intimate matters. And this is from the major sins. However, it needs to be noted here, an important point is that when he divulges his secret, his intention is simply to gratuitously divulge this matter or this secret. And that is not a noble intention. As for if he comes to a sheikh whom he wants to ask a question about a particular intimate matter, and he informs the sheikh whom he wants the fatwa from that he had intercourse in such and such a manner, then this is permissible. Because here, his intention is not to just spread this particular secret. Rather, his intention is to obtain a hukum or a ruling. But despite having said this, we would say that it would be better for such a man to speak in general terms. So not to say, I did this and this, but rather to ask the shaykh something like, oh shaykh, what do you say about a man who does such and such with his wife? So that in this way he does not specify his own self. What about the woman? Is the woman allowed to share the secrets of her husband? Well, again, we say the ruling is the same. The Prophet has mentioned the man, that the man is the most evil in status in front of Allah on Yawm al-Qiyamah, because normally men would do such things. Women are normally shy. But as we saw in the previous hadith of the wife of Rifa'ah, she spread the secret of her husband, that he is sexually weak. And definitely this is spreading the secret, one may think. However, her intention was not gratuitously to do this, rather it was to seek a ruling. And this is why we say that your intention here matters. There is another hadith in Sahih Muslim where a man came and asked the Prophet about a man having intercourse with his wife, but he tires out and leaves the intercourse off without ejaculating. And the Prophet ﷺ said, and Aisha was present, إِنِّي لَأَفْعَلُ ذَلِكَ أَنَا وَهَذِهِ ثُمَّ نَغْتَسِلْ. I do this, I and her, meaning Aisha, who is with him, and then we take a bath. So again here, the Prophet is talking about a private matter, an intimate affair between him and his wife, but it is not a gratuitous statement which he's making. Rather, the intention and the aim here is to make plain a Shar'i ruling.
Just a few more points of benefit. After the third divorce, we said that the woman has to consummate marriage with another husband. Now, consummation here is simply penetration. The man does not have to ejaculate. This is the minimum threshold, according to the majority of the scholars. Now, even if this intercourse happened during her menses, of course that would be haram, but it would still make the tahleel, the remarriage, halal. But do notice, however, that the second marriage, after the 3 divorces, needs to be a nikahun sahih, a valid marriage contract. It is not allowed to be a batil marriage contract because its presence is like its absence. So for example, if the woman gets married to a Christian or a Jewish man or any kafir man for that matter, then this marriage contract is batil, and all the major scholars agree to this. As for the shaitan not harming the child, if that dhikr is mentioned, then one can debate about what harm means here, because harm is of many different types. But what appears to be the soundest opinion is that the harm mentioned in the narration is that the shaitan would not overcome this child, and that he will be one of those whom Allah Jalla wa Ala says, Inna ibadi laysa laka alayhim sultan. Indeed, my servants, you have no authority over them. You will not be able to misguide them. And such servants of Allah will not do your bidding. Also, with respects to the woman not answering the call of her spouse, in this hadith there is a rebuttal against those who say that the Muslim man can rape his wife. Because if that were permissible, then this hadith would have mentioned it, because this is the opportune time to mention such an act. That if your wife does not respond, then you know what? You can just forcefully overcome her. But notice how the Prophet did not give this permission. Also, needlessly talking about intimate matters between the spouse is analogous to actually physically doing the act in front of other people. And this is how the Prophet put it. When in an authentic narration he asked his companions, perhaps some of you talk about intimate matters regarding what you did with your spouses, and then one woman said, yes, people do that. And the Prophet said, do not do so, because the likeness of that is a shaitan meeting a shaitana and having intercourse with her on the road, meaning publicly. So just as you would not physically have conjugal relations in the public, so also you must not talk about them. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. Why did Allah Jalla wa Ala ordain that the Prophet should marry Zainab bint Jahash? Question number 2. What are the conditions for it to be obligatory to attend the Walima? Question number 3. If a husband divorces his wife for the 3rd time and then wants to remarry her, then what must take place before a new marriage contract can be conducted?